Now, the Corus Radio Network presents The Roy Green Show with Roy Green, keeping you informed and entertained. Now, here's Roy.
Email anytime to Roy at RoyGreenshow.com. There's also the issue of the Kirpans, which has generated and continues to generate discussion and debate in this country, with a delegation from the World Sikh organization not being permitted into the Quebec National Assembly, which is a grandiose way of saying the provincial legislature, because they were wearing kirpans. They were there to speak to the issue of the burqa law in Quebec and weren't allowed in. We'll have the General Counsel of the World Sikh organization on with us, along with constitutional lawyer Julius Gray from Montreal. Mr. Gray argued successfully in court to allow students to wear kirpans to school. And we'll have a member of Parliament, Navdeed Bains. He's a Liberal member of Parliament and a Sikh who wears his kirpan everywhere he goes. Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe has said kirpans shouldn't be allowed in Parliament. I didn't call the Bloc because just customarily they won't speak with me. Don't know why. Vic Taves, the Federal Minister for Public Safety, later on this hour. Number of issues we're going to deal with him, including the family of the deposed Tunisian dictator being in Montreal. How's the federal government respond to that? This story, which has had this country talking, and I think appropriately, because it has to be addressed. A delegation from the World Sikh organization was denied entry to the Quebec National Assembly for hearings into the No Burqa Quebec law because they were wearing the religious symbol, the kirpan dagger. So that became an issue, and then the Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe said that no kirpans should be permitted in Parliament, even though we know that Liberal MP Navdeed Bains is a Sikh who wears a kirpan. Mr. Bains is going to be speaking to this. He joins us on the Roy Green Show on the Corus Radio Network, along with Julius Gray, Montreal constitutional lawyer, who successfully argued in court that Sikh students should be permitted to wear kirpans to school. And we have Palbinder Shergill with us. She is the General Counsel for the World Sikh Organization. Palbinder, good to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you, and hello to all your listeners out there.
And Julius, you and I speak about these constitutional issues on a fairly regular basis. This one is really significant.
It is, and I wanted to say hello to Palbinder. Of course, I haven't spoken to her in a while.
Hi, Julius.
Hi, how are you?
And you both worked on the case in Montreal. You worked together, right?
Yes.
Mr. Bains, good to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green, for having me on.
Well, let's start with you, Mr. Bains. We'll backtrack to what happened in the Quebec National Assembly, but here you are, a member of Parliament, and you hear somebody who actually sits on the same side of the House with you, not a member of your party, but sits on the same side of the House. You have the leader of the Bloc Québécois saying that he doesn't believe that for security reasons you should be permitted to wear your kirpan into Parliament. What was your immediate reaction to that?
Well, I was surprised and very disappointed, to say the least, because many of the Bloc members actually sit right beside me in the House of Commons, and so I've had the ability to interact with them on numerous occasions, and many of them have asked questions about why I wear a turban or about the kirpan, and we've talked about that at length. So I was very surprised to hear this concern that they raised about security, about the kirpan in the House of Commons, and so it did catch me off guard. It was very disappointing. And they full well know that not only do I wear it in the House of Commons, but I've worn it in the Supreme Court of Canada. I've had the opportunity to visit the U.S. Congress as well and wear it there. So I actually was very shocked, to say the least, by their remarks.
Did Mr. Duceppe raise this with you at all? Did he personally address you?
No, and that's the shocking part. That's the frustrating part. If this was a legitimate concern that they had the opportunity to speak to me for many years. I've been there for 6.5 years with them. Many of us got elected at the same time in 2004. I actually know many of the Bloc members because we work together in committee and in other areas. And so they know full well. Even when we go to the gym, sometimes they see me and they see the kirpan. So I was very surprised that they never raised it. I was very surprised that Mr. Duceppe took it upon himself to take this and politicize it the way he did, as opposed to trying to deal with it in a calm, rational approach to find a solution towards the legitimate concerns, if he had any, about security. Because this last Monday, I was in Newfoundland, Labrador, in the legislature there. And again, it was not an issue. So I visited many of the legislatures across the country. I've visited other legislatures outside of Canada, and it's never been an issue. So why in Quebec, and then why did Mr. Duceppe feel that it was a...
What do you think he's saying? I mean, what do you really think Gilles Duceppe is saying? Is he saying that you are a danger in Parliament, or is he saying there are rules in Parliament and the Kirpan violates those rules? Or is he saying both?
Well, I mean, he'll have to clarify what he was trying to get at. But the way I see it, he's politicizing, and it's fear-mongering.
Have you tried to speak with him?
No, I have not yet. But I mean, when I get the opportunity, I will do so.
Right.
I have no hesitation to do that, and I'd be more than glad to address any concerns that he has. I mean, it's about leadership, and I think him pitting one Canadian against another, and planting this the seed of suspicion and confusion and mistrust is not the way to deal with such an issue. This is a very important issue. It requires leadership where you say, look, hold on, let's respect each other for our differences. Let's find out what are the areas of concern and how can we work together to address those concerns. And we're very fortunate in Canada that we have a Supreme Court ruling that in 2006 made it very clear that Kirpan was not a weapon. And so I think we need to now move beyond that and say, okay, look, the Kirpan is not a weapon, and how can we address any of the concerns related to that and educate the public?
All right, Julius, you and Palbinder were the ones who had a great deal to do with this Supreme Court ruling.
Yes, and I think it's a clear ruling that says that there may be certain situations where it won't be allowed on airplanes, for instance, because there's a migrant population, if you like, everybody comes in and leaves, and the particular danger is well perceived. But in a place like a school or like Parliament or like the National Assembly, there's really no reason for this. There's no serious security concern anywhere. I would also add that there's something particular, I think, about the National Assembly and about Parliament. That is that those institutions must be open to all Canadians, whatever they look like, whether they're Hasidim or Sikhs or ordinary Anglo-Saxons, French Canadians. Everybody must be equally able to go in and address those institutions.
There was a great deal of debate about this particular issue in 2006, prior to 2006, when you took it to court and Palbinder Shergill took it to the Supreme Court of Canada. Since that ruling, have there been any issues? Have there been any untoward issues that have had to do with the Kirpan in any schools or any other environments in this province?
There was one incident where he was charged, but he was acquitted of using the Kirpan. What is true is that in Quebec, in particular, the Kirpan is very unpopular. I don't understand why. I mean, I love Quebec and I live here and I have no difficulty, but on the particular issue of the Kirpan, there appears to be a lot of strong feeling, which is what I think explains the bloc. Normally they're good MPs, but I think just before an election they're playing to the electorate. Quebec is not the only place. I mean, law and order in Alberta is equally, I think, a sacred cow. But on the Kirpan, I'm constantly asked, why did you defend the Kirpan and so on? It remains a sensitive issue. I think wrongly so. I try to explain it. I think Quebec is a very good place and people do listen, but it's one of the realities that it's unpopular.
Palbinder Shergill, would you pick up on that train of thought? You're again involved in the case with Julius Gray, and you have a national perspective as well. As the General Counsel for the World Sikh Organization, please pick up on the train of thought from Julius Gray.
Certainly, Roy. And I think, what we need to sort of look back at is this, that the very reason that actually brought the Sikh delegation to attend at the Niqab hearings was really the requirement with the Kirpan, which really symbolizes for a Sikh that we need to stand up for the rights of others. We need to be able to defend those people that cannot represent their own perspectives. And as a result of that, the WSO attended there in order to support the rights of women, Muslim women, in order to be able to veil their faces. Now, the Sikh community holds a very unique position in that within our own religion, in fact, women are prohibited from veiling their faces. But we also hold a very strong view and tenet of the Sikh teachings, which is that you need to be able to defend the rights of others to freely practice their faith. And that really is envisioned and encapsulated in the Kirpan as the symbolic representation of that requirement. And so when it becomes the Kirpan that is the very item, the very reason that the Sikhs are excluded from attending the National Assembly, it does ring as very ironic.
Here's an email that I just received, and And we can talk about that. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We can talk about this. And this comes from Becky. She writes, Roy, I applaud Duceppe for his statement. He's absolutely right. Gun owners are controlled, but Kirpan carriers are not. A Kirpan is a weapon, is it not? Duceppe is the only politician who has the courage to speak up for reality rather than votes. We'll take a break, and then I'd like all three of you to address that particular email. That may be a train of thought. By the way, if you have I'm just going to do this spontaneously. If you have an opinion on this and you would like to express that opinion, or a question that you'd like to ask of my guest on the issue of the wearing of the Kirpan, you heard what the Bloc Québécois leader said. You know what's been decided in the Quebec National Assembly. 877-760-0006. 877-760-0006. We have the fundamentals in place constitutionally, freedom, rights of religion. So practice your religion. And it is a cornerstone. It's a fundamental cornerstone in our country. What do you make, and what questions do you have, and what opinion do you have of the banning of the Kirpan in the Quebec National Assembly, and Gilles Duceppe saying it should be banned, that Mr. Baines shouldn't be allowed to wear his Kirpan in Parliament any longer? 877-760-0006.
This is The Roy Green Show, all along the Chorus Radio Network.
Anytime to Roy at RoyGreenshow.com, which Becky did on the issue of the wearing of the Kirpan, which is the discussion point on the show now, and my guests are Palbinder Shergill, she's the General Counsel for the World Sikh Organization, Julius Gray, Montreal constitutional lawyer, who with Ms. Shergill successfully argued in court that Sikh students should be permitted to wear the Kirpan to school, and Navdeep Baines is a Liberal member of Parliament and a Sikh who wears his Kirpan in Parliament and everywhere he goes, and he's never been challenged in an official capacity. And so, Mr. Baines, I read my listener's email because I thought it was relevant to go to that aspect of the debate there, because you know there's the thinking that Becky put forward, that it's a weapon, that there are controls for gun owners, and so there should be for the Kirpan, which may or may not mirror what Mr. Duceppe is thinking. I know what he said, but what, with due respect, sir, what politicians say and think are not always the same thing. What do you make of what Becky said, what she wrote?
I think this is what Mr. Duceppe wants. He wants to politicize the debate. You know, I mean, we're comparing right now that particular point that was raised with respect to the gun registry and the Kirpan. It's apples and oranges. We live in a constitutional democracy, and the Charter of Rights and Freedom are very clear when it comes to freedom of religion, that one law applies to all, and it's about respecting that law. And what essentially is happening here, in my opinion, is that we need to find common ground. And if there are cases where those extreme situations exist, the way it was mentioned before with respect to taking a flight or going on the plane, and in my opinion, it's not only the Sikhs that have to make those accommodations or have to make those changes, but others do with respect to the amount of liquid they can take on, with body scans, if they can take on a nail cutter. So that's a very unique environment, but it shows that, you know, we're more than willing to make those changes if necessary. But to compare it with the gun registry, I think, again, is not a fair and balanced debate.
Okay, let me take a call.
Yeah.
Mr. Baines, let me take a call. Let's talk to Paul, who's in Edmonton. Paul, what do you say here?
Well, I personally have no problem with responsible people carrying weapons, which is what the Kirpan is. Like, it's maybe ceremonial, but if you hand it to me, I mean, like, it's going to be considered a weapon. And I too believe that I should be able to carry a knife or any other object like that if I'm responsible. So like I said, I don't have a problem with them carrying it, but I think everybody should be allowed to carry it. I don't think it should be limited to just a religious thing because, well, I mean, like,
does the factor, Paul, where does the factor of religiosity, if you will, come into play for you? Or does it at all?
I don't know what the definition of a religion is, but I think it's basically any irrationally held belief or something like that. So I think if you rationally believe that you should be able to carry a knife for rational and responsible purposes, like they say they do, like if they want to carry it to protect people's freedoms.
All right, Paul, get your point. Thank you very much. Paul Binder, maybe we should talk about the significance of the Kirpan to the Sikh religion?
I think so, and this is where there's a fundamental flaw in both Paul's and Becky's thinking, and I think partly that's the Sikh community's responsibility. We haven't done the best that we could have in terms of educating the public, but to call it a weapon is not just saying apples and oranges. In fact, you're comparing apples to rocks. They're completely different. The Kirpan, when it was created as an article of faith, incorporated as an article of faith in the Sikh religion, that happened at the turn of the 18th century. At that time, guns were widely available. But the desire to have the Kirpan had nothing to do with using it as a weapon, because if it had been, of course, a gun would have been incorporated as that. The Kirpan represented the sword of spiritual power for the Sikhs. Much as if we now, of course, go into the House of Commons, we see a mace. The mace that's in the House of Commons that's used during ceremonies with the Speaker, symbolically, hundreds of years ago, may have in fact been, and was in fact, a very violent image with that mace. It was used for violent purposes. But no one would suggest it has any violent representations when it is used in the symbolic way that it is. For the Sikhs, the Kirpan, the word itself means grace, magnanimity. It stands for the obligation of a Sikh to support and stand up against injustice. And
what I would like to say, too, is that in the context in which it happened, there had been horrendous injustice towards the Sikhs, torture, murder of the gurus, dreadful violations of the most fundamental rights. And the Kirpan is a symbol of resistance to evil. In the same way, we would not object to a symbol, O Canada in the French version speaks of a sword, and La Marseillaise speaks of taking up arms against evil. That's not a bad symbol. It's a noble symbol, and it doesn't mean that it is a weapon when it's worn by an ordinary person.
Paul in British Columbia, just a few seconds, Paul. Make your point, please.
I was just thinking, I do have respect for a lot of other religions around the world. I think we should honor them. But I also think that if they're going to carry items like that, and I have no objection to it, if it's maybe kept welded shut so that it can't be used as a weapon.
All right, thank you. Julius, did that come up in your in your case?
The judgment does say that it has to be wrapped and it has to be difficult to get at in school, because they did, in the first instance, in Quebec, before Madame Justice Grenier, the issue came up about putting some impediments to its use. All that, I think, that's fine and fair and just, but I also want to point out that danger is normally something that you decide on a statistical basis.
All right.
And statistically, there's nothing to fear.
I thank you all three for joining us on this issue. Thank you. It's important. Have a great day.